Hello, dear YouTube viewers, I hope you're doing well. Okay, let's start our video. Michael woke up at 7, just as the pale light of morning slipped through the curtains. The house was quiet, too quiet. Normally, by this time, the faint sound of Lena humming in the kitchen or the smell of coffee filled the air. But that morning, there was only the soft tapping of her phone screen. She was sitting at the table, still in her robe, her attention fixed on the glowing rectangle in her hand. He smiled and tried to start the day the same way he always did. "Morning," he said, reaching for the coffee pot. "Want me to drop you off today? I have to pass your office anyway." She barely looked up. "No, it's fine. I'm running late." Her tone was sharp, clipped, almost defensive. Michael hesitated. "You're running late, but you haven't even gotten ready yet." She gave a small, unreadable smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes, then stood up abruptly and walked toward the bedroom. When she returned, she was dressed in something new, a crisp beige blouse he hadn't seen before, and a strong, unfamiliar perfume hung in the air. It was expensive, too floral, too deliberate. He wanted to say something but didn't. Instead, he pretended to read the news while she moved around the kitchen, silent and detached. A strange distance hung between them, like static. She grabbed her bag. "Don't wait up," she said lightly, her tone somewhere between casual and cold. Then she was gone. The door shut softly, leaving behind a silence that pressed on his chest. Michael stared at his untouched coffee, the swirl of steam fading into the air. "She used to text me good morning," he thought. "Now I'm lucky, if she even looks at me." He tried to shake it off, convincing himself she was just stressed, maybe something at work. But even as he drove to the office, a knot of unease sat heavy in his stomach. Every red light seemed to last too long. Every song on the radio felt distant. At 10 o'clock, he texted her. "Did you reach safely?" No reply. By noon, he called. Straight to voicemail. He tried again, thinking maybe her phone battery had died. Still the same. At 2, he checked their location-sharing app, something they had both turned on years ago after she once lost her phone. Her location was unavailable. Disabled. That hit differently. It wasn't just her being busy. It was intentional. Michael stared at the screen, thumb hovering over her name. He thought about their argument 2 nights ago, about her late meetings, about how she'd been distant. She had said, "Not everything's about you, Michael." But it was the way she'd said it, coldly, that made him feel small. Now, the same chill returned. He tried to work, burying himself in spreadsheets, but his focus splintered. Every vibration from his phone made his heart jump. When he finally checked, it was just a spam email about a car warranty. His colleague, Dan, looked over and smirked. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Everything okay?" Michael forced a laugh. "Yeah, just waiting on a call." But as the hours stretched, the weight of her silence grew heavier. It wasn't just that she hadn't answered. It was what that silence meant. Trust doesn't break with shouting or betrayal, he realized. It cracks quietly, under small moments like this. Unanswered calls, unread messages, the absence of a familiar voice. And as he sat there, staring at his phone screen for the 10th time that day, he wondered if this was how love ends. Not in drama, but in silence. By 2 o'clock, the silence had become unbearable. Michael stared at his phone as if willing it to light up. Still nothing, no text, no missed call, no notification that she'd even been online. He refreshed her chat again and again, though he already knew what he'd see. The same blank screen, the same last message from that morning. "Did you reach safely?" He sent another text, just to fill the emptiness. "Hey, are you okay? Just let me know you're safe." No reply. He opened their group chat with mutual friends and typed carefully, trying to sound casual. "Anyone talk to Lena today?" A few minutes passed before one of her friends replied, "Not since yesterday evening."
"Why?"
Another said she'd texted Lena about lunch plans, but hadn't heard back either. A faint chill ran through him. Lena wasn't the type to disappear. Even on bad days, she'd at least drop a message, a thumbs up, a quick busy. This silence felt deliberate. He leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at his computer screen. The spreadsheet in front of him blurred as his mind drifted backward to a year ago, when things were simple. He could still see her walking into his office unannounced, holding 2 coffees with that playful grin that made even Mondays tolerable. She'd place the cup on his desk and tease, "You'd forget to eat if I didn't remind you." Back then, she laughed easily, loved loudly, and looked at him like he was still her favorite person in the world. But lately, something had changed. He remembered the last few weeks, the late nights, the quick explanations, the way her phone would light up with messages she never opened in front of him. Once, when he'd asked, she'd snapped, "It's work stuff, Michael. You wouldn't get it." And then there was Daniel, her new coworker. She mentioned him casually at first, but soon his name began appearing more often in her stories. "Daniel said this funny thing today," or "Daniel helped with the project." Every time she said his name, Michael felt something twist inside him, something ugly and uncertain. Now, sitting in his office, he couldn't stop the thoughts spiraling. Is she with him right now? Did she turn off her phone so I wouldn't know? Or worse, is she in trouble? The questions fed each other until he couldn't tell fear from jealousy. By 5 o'clock, he couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed his keys and left work early, ignoring the look from his manager as he walked out. The drive to Lena's office felt endless, traffic crawling under a sky turning orange and gray. His pulse quickened as he pulled into the parking lot. Her car wasn't there. Inside, the building was mostly empty. The security guard at the front desk looked up and recognized him. "Hey, you're Lena's husband, right?" Michael nodded, trying to keep his voice steady.
"Yeah.
"I've been trying to reach her all day. Did she come in today?" The guard thought for a moment. "Yeah, she was here this morning. Left early, though, around 11, I think. Looked kinda upset." The words hit harder than he expected. Upset how? Just quiet, like she'd been crying or something. Michael thanked him and walked back to the car, heart pounding. Upset? Crying? Why hadn't she called him? He tried her sister next. "Hey, have you heard from Lena?" Her sister sounded distracted. "No, not today. Maybe she just needed space? You guys were arguing a lot lately, right?" Michael gripped the steering wheel tighter. "So, she just disappears?" Without a word. "Sometimes people need air, Mike," her sister said gently. "She'll call you when she's ready." But that answer didn't help. It just left him more lost. By the time he got home, the sun had dipped below the horizon. The house greeted him with emptiness. The air felt heavier, the walls too quiet. Every tick of the clock echoed through the living room. He turned on the lights, trying to make the place feel less lifeless, but it didn't work. It felt like stepping into someone else's home, a place where love used to live but had since packed its bags and left. He heated some leftovers, barely tasted them, and sat at the table with his phone in front of him. Every few minutes he checked the screen. Nothing. Just the dull glow reflecting his tired face. "She's okay," he told himself. "She has to be okay." But each time he thought it, the conviction sounded weaker. He opened their photo gallery, scrolling through memories that once felt warm but now seemed like scenes from another lifetime. Their anniversary trip to the beach, Lena laughing with wind-tangled hair. Her birthday dinner, candles glowing against her smiling face. A selfie from their first apartment, both of them younger, unguarded, happy. Now those smiles looked different.
Forced.
Fragile. He felt a cold ache spread through his chest as realization crept in. Maybe he hadn't noticed how far apart they'd drifted. Maybe she'd been gone long before today, just not physically. The phone buzzed suddenly, making him jump. He snatched it up, but it was only a notification from the delivery app reminding him about discounts on dinner. He almost laughed at how cruelly ironic it was. As the night deepened, the silence grew louder. Every unanswered call felt like a tiny fracture in his certainty, another piece of his trust crumbling away. What started as concern was now bleeding into dread. He looked at his reflection in the dark window, eyes tired, face lined with worry, and realized something painful. He no longer knew if he was waiting for his wife to come home, or for the truth to finally arrive. By 9 o'clock, Michael had reached the edge of himself. The silence wasn't just around him anymore, it was inside him, clawing at his chest. Every minute stretched longer than the last. The ticking clock on the wall mocked him with its steady rhythm, a reminder that she still hadn't come home. He grabbed his keys and stormed out of the house. The night air hit him cold and sharp, carrying that faint metallic scent of rain waiting to fall. He didn't even know where he was going, he just drove. Through the glowing streets, past familiar corners, chasing ghosts of her smile in the reflections of passing cars. He ended up near the little cafe they used to visit every Friday after work. It was almost empty now, a couple of students tapping away on laptops, the smell of coffee lingering in the dim light. He parked and went inside, his heart beating hard as he scanned the room. Part of him hoping, part of him terrified, that she might be there. The barista, a young guy with tired eyes, recognized him immediately. "Hey man, haven't seen you two in a while." Michael's throat felt tight. "Yeah, she's not around today, is she?" "My wife, Lena?" The barista shook his head.
"No, sorry.
"Haven't seen her all day." Michael nodded faintly, his chest sinking. "Thanks." He left without ordering anything. Back in the car, he sat with his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. The city blurred around him, headlights, laughter from passing pedestrians, the hum of traffic, all of it distant, unreal. He called again, and again. Voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. Then suddenly a ring. Just once. The screen lit up, calling Lena, and the sound of a single, fragile ring broke through the silence before cutting off abruptly. Michael froze. Then whispered under his breath, voice trembling between anger and heartbreak. "So, you are looking at your phone." For a moment, he just sat there in the stillness, staring at the dark screen. He wanted to throw the phone, to scream, to cry, but instead, he just leaned back in the seat, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle in. It wasn't the kind of tired sleep could fix. It was the kind that came from loving someone who might not love you back anymore. By the time he drove home, the streets were mostly empty. The porch light glowed faintly, like a half-hearted welcome. Inside, the house felt colder than before, as if even the walls were holding their breath. He sat on the couch, phone still in his hand, his mind replaying every moment of the day like a loop he couldn't escape. What had she been doing? Why hadn't she called? He thought about calling the police, but what would he say? "My wife isn't answering her phone and I have a bad feeling?" It sounded ridiculous, even to him. So he waited, drowning in thoughts that refused to be quiet. The only sound was the clock ticking.
Tick, tick, tick.
Then, just as the hands hit 10, click. The front door unlocked. Michael froze. His heart lurched so hard it almost hurt. Lena stepped in, framed by the faint glow of the porch light. Her hair was tangled, her makeup smudged, her eyes red and swollen as if she'd been crying. Her clothes, once neat and crisp, looked rumpled, slightly dirted, like she'd been outside for hours. For a second, relief washed through him. She was here. She was safe. But it was quickly swallowed by anger, confusion, hurt. He stood up, voice breaking between accusation and desperation. "Where have you been?" "I called all day, Lena. All day." She didn't answer right away. She closed the door softly behind her, dropped her purse on the table, and exhaled as though she'd just come back from war. When she finally looked up at him, there was a faint, almost surreal smirk on her face, not cruel, not mocking, but strange, like she was on the edge of disbelief herself. Her voice came out quiet, hoarse. "You'll never believe this." Michael blinked, confusion slicing through his anger. "Believe what? Where were you?" But she didn't answer. Instead, she walked slowly to the couch, sat down heavily, and reached into her bag. Her hands trembled as she searched inside. Michael stood there, his breath shallow, fear replacing fury. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before. Not guilt, not defiance, something closer to shock. When she finally pulled something out, it wasn't her phone, not her wallet, but an old, faded photograph. She stared at it for a long time, her fingers tracing the edge as if it might fall apart if she let go. Then, without looking up, she whispered, almost to herself, I thought I lost you today. Michael felt the air shift. Every thought, every suspicion he'd built throughout the day suddenly paused, waiting for whatever truth was about to surface. He took a cautious step closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena, what happened? She lifted her eyes, tired, glassy, broken, and said again, this time more softly, you'll never believe this. And as the clock ticked in the background, he realized he didn't know whether to brace for a confession or a miracle. Lena sat there for a long moment, staring down at the photograph in her trembling hands. Michael couldn't tell what it was at first, just a small square of faded paper, edges curled from age. Then he saw, it was a picture of them, years ago, on their first vacation together. She was laughing, wind in her hair, and he had his arm around her like he never wanted to let go. He felt his throat tighten. Lena, what's going on? Where were you all day? She took a shaky breath, still not meeting his eyes. On my way to work this morning, I was about 10 minutes from the office, she began quietly. It happened right at the intersection near Maple and 4th. There was this horrible screech, and then a crash. Her voice faltered, her fingers gripping the photo tighter. Michael stepped closer, but didn't interrupt. I looked up, she continued, and saw a car spinning out of control. It hit another one hard. I didn't even think. I just stopped and ran toward it. People were already gathering, shouting, but no one was doing anything. The driver, the man, he was slumped against the wheel, blood everywhere. Her voice cracked. And, Michael, he looked just like you. The room went silent. Michael felt his heartbeat slow, then race. What do you mean, like me? She nodded, eyes glistening. Same hair, same build. Even the same jacket. I swear for a moment, I thought it was you. I panicked. I didn't even check my phone. I opened the car door, held his shoulder, called his name, your name. I was screaming for someone to call 911. Her voice trembled harder. When the ambulance came, I just got in. I didn't think. I couldn't. They wouldn't let me ride next to him, so I sat in the back, praying he'd breathe. My hands were covered in his blood. I kept saying, please, please don't die, over and over. Michael's mouth went dry. He could almost see it, the chaos, the flashing sirens, her fear. At the hospital, she whispered, they rushed him inside. The paramedics asked if I was his wife. I said yes. I didn't even correct them. I was too scared. They told me to wait outside while they stabilized him. I just sat there for hours, Michael.
Hours.
My phone died sometime around noon, and I didn't even notice. I didn't eat, I didn't move. I just kept thinking, how would I live if you were gone? Her voice broke completely then, the words dissolving into a sob. Michael stood frozen, his anger crumbling into disbelief and guilt. When the doctor finally came out, she went on. He said the man had woken up. I ran inside, and that's when I saw him. It wasn't you. It wasn't even close once I really looked. But the relief, she wiped her tears, shaking her head. I started crying so hard they had to sit me down. I think that's when I realized how close I came to losing you, even if it was just in my head. Michael sat down slowly across from her, hands clasped tightly together. His heart was pounding, but for the first time all day, not from anger. Why didn't you call me after? You could have borrowed someone's phone. She let out a trembling laugh that wasn't quite a laugh. I know. I should have. But I was so shaken, I couldn't even think straight. I stayed there until evening, just sitting in the hospital cafeteria, staring at the wall. And when I finally got up and came home, I didn't know what to say to you. I didn't want to walk in here crying, making you think I was crazy, so I smiled. Michael blinked, the memory of that smirk flashing through his mind, the one that had infuriated him. You smiled because you didn't want to fall apart. She nodded weakly. It was the only way I could hold myself together. It wasn't a smirk. It was a shield. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked faintly in the background, but everything else was still. Michael finally whispered, I spent the whole day thinking the worst of you. I thought maybe you didn't care, or that you were with someone else. I was angry, but mostly I was scared. Lena met his gaze, her eyes red and raw. I know. I could see it the second I walked in. And I don't blame you. I've been so distant lately. I've made it easy for you to doubt me. She took a deep breath. It wasn't about you, Michael. I've just been lost. Tired. I felt like you stopped seeing me, stopped hearing me. And instead of saying that, I pulled away. He looked down, shame washing through him like a cold tide. I did stop noticing. I let us become routine. I thought silence was peace. I didn't realize it was distance. Tears streamed down her face as she said softly, "Seeing that man, thinking it was you, it broke me. I thought I'd lost you before I even had a chance to say sorry." Michael swallowed hard, voice barely steady. "And I almost lost you in my mind 100 times today." That was all it took. They both fell silent again, eyes glistening, and then, slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation, their fingers locking together as if they were remembering how to fit. Neither of them spoke for a while. The only sounds were their uneven breaths and the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Eventually, she rested her head on his shoulder. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered. "We can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not." He nodded. No more pretending. No more silence. They sat there for hours, talking quietly about everything they hadn't said, the small resentments, the misunderstandings, the fears they'd both ignored. There were no big promises, no grand apologies, just honesty, raw and fragile. When the clock neared midnight, Lena looked up at him and said softly, "Today scared me, but maybe that's what we needed, to remember how easily everything can disappear." Michael brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice low. "We were both gone for a while. Maybe tonight was how we find our way back." And as they sat in the dim light of their living room, surrounded by silence that finally felt peaceful again, he realized something he hadn't all day. She hadn't been avoiding him. She'd been finding her way back to him, just like he'd been trying to find his way back to her. Morning light spilled through the thin curtains, soft and golden, touching everything in the room with quiet warmth. The clock on the wall ticked softly, a gentle reminder that time hadn't stopped, even though it felt like the world had paused for them. Michael opened his eyes slowly and realized they were still on the couch. Lena's head rested on his shoulder, her hand still loosely wrapped around his. Their fingers had stayed intertwined all night, as if neither of them dared to let go. For a moment he didn't move. He just listened to her steady breathing, to the faint hum of the refrigerator, to the silence that, for the first time in a long while, didn't feel heavy. He looked at her and thought about the chaos of the previous night, the fear, the anger, the relief. Somehow, they had survived all of it. Lena stirred, blinking as the sunlight hit her face. She looked around, confused for a second, then smiled faintly when she saw him watching her. "Did we really fall asleep here?" she asked, her voice rough from crying. "Yeah," he said softly. "Didn't seem right to move." Her eyes fell on her phone, lying on the coffee table. The battery icon blinked red, dead. She plugged it in, and when it came to life, both of them froze at the same sight. 47 missed calls. 12 unread messages. Lena stared at the screen, exhaling shakily. "I can't believe this." Michael gave a half smile, weary but genuine. "You were practically a missing person." She let out a weak laugh, then covered her face. "I really scared you, didn't I?" He nodded slowly.
Yeah.
"More than I thought possible." For a while, neither of them spoke. The sunlight stretched across the floorboards, touching their faces, warm and forgiving. They both knew, without needing to say it, how close they'd come to losing something far deeper than just each other's presence. They'd almost lost their connection, their trust. Lena reached over, taking his hand again. "I don't want another day like yesterday," she whispered.
Me neither, he said.
"Ever." Later that morning, they made coffee together. The air was filled with the familiar hiss of the kettle, the clinking of cups, the scent of roasted beans, small things that felt like pieces of normal life returning. They stood in the kitchen quietly, side by side, each thinking about what had happened, what had almost happened. Michael broke the silence first. "You know, it wasn't the silence that almost ended us," he said, staring into his cup. "It was what I filled that silence with doubt." Lena turned toward him slowly, her eyes soft but sad. "And I gave you reasons to doubt. I thought keeping things to myself would make things easier, but it just pushed you away." He shook his head gently. "We both made it too easy to get lost." She took a deep breath. "Then let's not keep guessing anymore. Let's actually fix this." He looked up at her. "You mean counseling?" she said simply. "Honest conversations. I don't want to just pretend things are fine. I want us to actually be fine." For the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled fully. "Yeah, I want that too." They stood there for a while, the sunlight wrapping around them like quiet forgiveness. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic vows, just two people who had finally learned how fragile love becomes when silence takes its place. As the morning stretched on, Michael looked at her, really looked, and realized that what they had wasn't broken beyond repair. It was just waiting to be rebuilt, one honest word at a time. And as his thoughts settled, a quiet truth formed in his mind, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Sometimes the scariest night of your life isn't when someone disappears, it's when your trust does. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe our channel. Awesome visual story.